I'm sure if you're a fan of horror or fantasy stories, there occasionally comes the question, is what has been depicted on the page reality, or are the characters insane, or dreaming, or simply mistaken? If you want to be all literary about it, I think the term is unreliable narrator. Now, I'm not going to turn this video into a philosophical circle jerk on the levels of the Matrix regarding how things are only real because your brain perceives them to be real. Basically, what this video is looking at is if what happens in Lovecraft's tales is really happening, or are the characters just nuts in imagining it? Are the events actually happening or not? Do the creatures really exist or not? The question, I suppose, is quite relevant because, remind me again, how many of his characters go insane? And I've seen this question talked about often enough as well. After some thought, my conclusion is that everything is really happening and not delusion. Here are 4 reasons why I think so. Reason number 1. A quote from Lovecraft. I don't think that Lovecraft, who was so bored with human issues and the mundane frustrations of existence, would do that. Lovecraft, the man who wrote extensively on the tediums of day-to-day living in his letters, the man whose writings are cornerstones of weird fiction, which in itself is a genre based around the explicable violation of what we expect. Read his short story, Sell a Face, to just highlight his general disdain for reality and his desire to escape it. No other story quite captures that. And may I quote him now when he said,
I could never write about ordinary people, because I'm not in the least interested in them. And without interest, there can be no art. Man's relation to man does not captivate my fancy. It is man's relation to the cosmos, to the unknown, which alone arouses in me the spark of creative imagination.
To end the story with the letdown that this amazing, albeit horrific world and its blasphemous inhabitants are purely the thoughts of a nutjob, and that we really are actually just stuck on a boring planet, is not his style. Sure, these days I think some postmodernists would say, oh wow, isn't it amazing, look at what it tells us about society, isn't it deep, blah blah blah. That's not Howard's style, I think. The result is too human-centric. Again, remember what he said.
I could never write about ordinary people, because I'm not in the least interested in them.
By the way, in case you're wondering, that's not really H.P. Lovecraft. That's just some actor reading a quote by Lovecraft. Just so you know. Reason number 2. Well, it's another quote. I want to look at a quote from Lovecraft coming from his essay, Supernatural Horror in Literature. The true weird tale has something more than a secret murder, bloody bones, or a sheeted form clanking chains according to the rule. A certain atmosphere of breathless and inexplicable dread of outer, unknown forces must be present, and there must be a hint expressed with a seriousness and portentousness becoming its subject of that most terrible conception of the human brain, a malign and particular suspension or defeat of those fixed laws of nature which are only safeguard against the assaults of chaos and the demons of unplumbed space. That's quite a mouthful. Lovecraft wrote this as his definition of the weird tale, the genre in which he specialized in. A suspension or defeat of those fixed laws of nature. Keep that in mind. Now, if we believe that he kept this notion in consideration when writing, then we can conclude that my argument is correct. If the narrator is merely nuts or under the influence of drugs, then that is absolutely not the suspension or defeat of those fixed laws of nature. Being crazy, for example, with schizophrenia, comes from a chemical imbalance in the brain. Taking hallucinogens or other types of drugs is also a chemical reaction in the brain. Both would count as being chemistry or biology, fixed laws of nature that we can understand and explain more and more accurately as medical science prevails and goes on. Reason number 3. His characters are the definition of credible witnesses. Let's look at his characters. Typically his characters are established to be intelligent, well-bred, educated, sane, and stable. They are academics, professors, or they are students or creative, intelligent, sensitive men such as writers or painters. Clearly Lovecraft modeled many on himself and who he wished he could be. Part of the enjoyment of Lovecraft is thinking, well, here you have this wonderful human specimen of mental fortitude and intelligence who is now insane or has killed themselves. Or at very least they have been deeply shaken. What in the hell could have made them like this? The fun part for the reader is just trying to imagine something so horrific, failing to, and then realizing that whatever it was so horrific you cannot even imagine it. It's like the film Predator. In the end you have Arnold battling the Predator. Arnold is basically the peak of human fitness, strength, and his character in the film is trained to kill and fight. That makes scenes where he gets his ass kicked just highlight how much of a badass the Predator was. If the Predator fought a soy boy instead, it really wouldn't be that amazing. Basically, Lovecraft's protagonists, in my opinion, are the mental equivalent of Arnold.
No shit.
Of course there are characters who are just normal people. The sailors on Arlia, the Gardner family in The Color Out of Space, but all the most well-known texts of Lovecraft feature characters I think are reliable witnesses to the horrors that befall them. As I sit making this video, only one instance comes to mind where I think that the protagonist is clearly mistaken. At the end of the story, Dagon, the protagonist, now living in San Francisco I believe, thinks he hears some aquatic monster trying to break into his room, and it's implied he kills himself by jumping out the window. At this point of the story, the character is also on drugs of some kind and had experienced a bout of madness after encountering whatever that thing was earlier on in the story. While some mythos monsters have shown the ability to get you anywhere, for example the Hounds of Tindalos, there's no hint that the creature in this story could, let alone know where the guy is located, and travel through a major city unhindered. So in my opinion there was nothing trying to break into his room, and the guy is clearly just delusional. Reason number 4. It is more enjoyable to believe it's all real. I think it is vastly more enjoyable to believe that it is all real in the context of the story. Arlia, Cthulhu, secret cults, towns like Innsmouth, and in the center of all existence, the blind idiot god Azathoth. Lovecraft's stories present locations I would get a thrill from visiting, protagonists of intelligence and sensitivity with whom one could grow fond of and sympathize with as one reads of their perils. And there are hideous beings which all but ensure humanity's destruction, but even imagining that those are real, in the context of the story of course, is exciting. Imagine yourself as one of the sailors in Arlia and picture Cthulhu coming forth from that black doorway. Imagine what it would be like to discover the truth of what lies underneath the pyramids. The alternative to believing that what is being depicted is real is that it's all delusion or madness on the part of the narrator. Why should that matter? Imagine if you took a fantasy world. Let's take Star Wars, okay? Imagine if in the next film they just said, by the way, this is all just fantasy of some kid in a coma and he finally wakes up. Goodbye force powers, goodbye lightsabers, and goodbye epic duels between fighters, goodbye to epic space battles also. Little Timmy was just tripping on his chemo drugs, don't you know? Does this plot twist highlight the desperation of poor little Timmy to find some pleasure in escapism? Sure it does. I'm sure this is literary gold to some people, but to me this is like inviting Buzz Killington to the party.
Who here likes a good story about a bridge?
It would be such a letdown. Let me red pill you about life. It is a curse that we have the imagination to see worlds vastly more colorful and interesting than our own, but can only visit these worlds through imagination, usually through the mediums of literature, film, and games. The last thing we need is some smug social realist pulling the rug out from under a fantastic weird tale and telling you it's all actually representative of previously mentioned little Timmy's wish for escapism, and that is the real story.
Fuck all that.
In conclusion, I severely doubt Lovecraft would have intended that his fantastical locations and blasphemous entities he so passionately wrote about are to be interpreted in a more realistic way as being merely delusions, and that the protagonist is just nuts. One need only page through his tales to read how his protagonists, typically thinly veiled versions of himself, speak of the emptiness and horror of reality, the foul thing that is reality. So, in the mythos, did all those things really happen? Do all those creatures exist? Or are the characters all mistaken or dreaming or something like that? Which do you think is the right answer, or do you think there's somewhere in between? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you later. And by the way, before I go, I just want to say thank you, because as of this video I have over 8,000 subscribers. That's a huge step, and I really enjoy doing this channel and making new videos, and there'll definitely be more coming soon, eventually. You know how slowly I upload, but everyone, thanks for watching. See you around.